Thank you, Don. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We know that there'll probably still be a few more folks joining us, but in the meantime, we do want to be cognizant of people's time and respectful. So we will get started. Thank you for being here. My name is Eric Cuello. I am the Director of Community Affairs here with Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. We are joined by Porfirio Figueroa from the Community Affairs team, who without him, these trainings do not happen. So thank you, Porfirio, for all your hard work on this, as well as Don Billings, who's the administrator with the Community Affairs Unit, and to our presenter, Dr. Jeremy Block, who you will see is an amazing person and really great at what he does. He is an adjunct lecturer at Baruch College and with the Mark School of Public Affairs, but I know Porfirio will have more on our presenter in just a moment. Before we get started, I just want to point out if you do have any questions or comments that you'd like to share, there is a Q&A function that is available down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please, at any moment, if you have a question or a concern, please drop it in there. Just a couple of things that I've seen come in already, and I just want to note, we are scheduled for an hour and a half, which is, we may go up to an hour and a half. We will see how the presentation goes and how many questions we do get on the presentation. I will also note if others have commitments or other things that they need to go to. We understand that this recording, as you can see, this presentation, as you can see, is being recorded, and it will be shared on the Borough President's website probably by the end of this week, if not beginning of next week. So you're always welcome to review anything that you've missed or share it with a colleague who wasn't able to join us this evening. As you already know, since you are in the right place, this is the final installment of our leadership training series on developing leaders and passing on institutional knowledge. I know that we had a full kind of boot camp week of trainings, and we weren't able to fit this one neatly into that week, but we are so grateful to Jeremy and to Baruch for being able to make this work. For me personally, as well as for this office, I can say that this topic is very top of mind for us. We know that term limits are coming in the next few years for some folks, and we really, really, really want to start thinking about how we can set up our boards, our chairs, our district managers, everybody with the tools that they need when so much institutional knowledge goes out, that door, even if it's just a couple of years or however long folks may be off the board. So because of that, we just really wanted to see how we can support you. And this is one of those ways. I've attended virtually or in person every single one of your board meetings. I know the quality of the leadership that we already have on these boards, and I see some up and coming, I won't say young, because there are different folks of varying demographics that join the boards, but we have folks that are joining boards maybe in the last couple of years who really could use some support and, can be identified as maybe the next leaders of this board. You all care about your community so much. That's why you do what you do. And I know that passing on all that institutional knowledge that you have is so incredibly important to making sure that the board and your communities really are set up for success. So I think with that, I'll pass it to Porfirio to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Eric. I so appreciate you. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Jeremy Block, who is a faculty member at the Mark School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College, CUNY, where he teaches courses on ethics, race and inequality, and science and technology policy. Dr. Block also serves as the Medical Office and Regulatory Science Strategy Director for the global technology company, Dassault Systems. In addition, he serves on the Clinical Trials Ethics Board, IRB, for MD Anderson Cancer Center and Northwell Health. He has served on his Cooperative Buildings Board since 2018 and is currently the board president. From 2017 through 22, Jeremy was a co-founder of Medaptive Health, acquired in 2022, which is a clinical trial technology company where he led product and regulatory functions. From 2016 through 2021, Jeremy served as Executive Director of Digital Health Study performing population screening of genetic founder mutations at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Previously, Dr. Block was an assistant professor of population health and science and policy at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, where he also was ethics board chairman, IRB, at hospitals within the Mount Sinai health system. And prior roles include working for the City of New York in procurement in the Bloomberg administration and the Office of Management and Budget within the Executive Office of the President of the United States in the Bush and Obama administrations. He holds a bachelor's in chemistry and biology, master's in public policy, and PhD in biochemistry from Duke University. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here, Dr. Black, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I know Eric from a number of years ago as he is a CUNY person. A lot of love to any of the people here who have or currently attended any of our CUNY schools. I love teaching at it. And thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited about this because I know how important community boards are. And when this opportunity came up, being somebody that has done volunteer work in various organizations in various sectors, I know what it's like to sit in your shoes and to work with others to try to get something done. And having the resources where somebody comes along and maybe tries to help is critically important. So I'm happy to join you. I did not prepare, by the way, a 90-minute talk. It is a Monday evening. You don't need to hear me talk for 90 minutes. I have a short-ish presentation, and then we can have a nice discussion afterwards. Please write down or put into the Q&A any questions you have, and we'll try to go through them all at the end. And our expert staff here with the Manhattan Borough President's Office will call them out and we'll talk through them and try to have a good dialogue. They're going to go through the slides. They're going to broadcast them, and I'm going to talk through them, and we can kind of take it from there. I think we've got to get the slides up and showing, unless they are and I can't see them, which is possible.
No, not just yet. Porfirio, thank you so much.
Great. This is just the intro. We can go to the next slide. A little bit about what we're going to talk about this evening. Your context, you all know this, what the Manhattan Borough President's Office does, their context and how they support you and your mission on the community boards. If you want to take a moment on this, we could, and maybe Eric could level set us if you need it. If not, and you all know the context that you're in, we could just blow right past it. But we'll have that first. Then I'm going to talk about developing leadership in the context of your service on a community board as a cycle, and we'll talk about each piece of that cycle. And then we will take a little bit of time to talk about both individual and group leadership and some of the dynamics and best practices and ways to think about that. And then we'll have ample time at the end for a Q&A. So that's what we'll do tonight, and I try to keep it clear and simple. By the way, this is a PDF with all of these slides. It can be provided to everybody afterwards. Happy to share it. Also, at the end of it is my contact information. And because I teach at a university and think this stuff is important, you can all reach out to me directly if you want. If you have additional questions, you want to sit for a coffee, you want to invite me to your community board so you can tell me how wrong I am about all of it. All of that's fair game. I'm here hopefully to be a resource to you and try to get that dialogue going for you to try to address all of the numerous challenges you have currently and ahead of you. Next slide. There we go. Your context. So it's always important on any sort of leadership track to understand the why, when, and where. Why do we have community boards? Why are you here? Why are we doing what we're doing? When do they come into play? What's their context? What's their role? And where do they sit within our overall system of governance here in New York City? Knowing that means also going back and looking at whatever rules, regulations, authorizing legislation, et cetera, that set them up, and knowing that stuff in fine enough detail so that you're aware of the boundaries of what you're doing, what's expected, what the support is, et cetera. I believe many people know this, but not always. And when you are going to bring somebody new onto a community board, it would be expected that you would want them to know that too. So I always say, know your context. It's important in any kind of government system to know your context. And I think the Manhattan Borough President's Office probably does a great job of going over that with you during your orientation. So we won't cover it here. I'm not an expert on it. Eric is an expert on it. Your other liaisons in that office, they know that really well. And the people who have been serving on it for some time, they really know the ins and outs, they're your experts. So make sure that they teach you and get you up to speed so you're all level set on the same understanding. Next slide. Okay, the beginning of the cycle, onboarding. And I'm going to talk through this. Some of this is going to be boring and obvious to you, but that's okay. We need to start reframing this whole thing as a cycle so you understand as you're coming on, what is the best practice? What are the best practices you can create? Then you can identify the assets and tools you need to do it. And then you can start operating it as a cycle, because when you start to have term limits and people start to rotate off the board, you don't want to lose anything. So I'm going to go through each piece of this cycle so that you can get a flavor of what you might want to improve upon or document going throughout it, so that going forward, you're creating an engine that's adding institutional capacity and not losing it when a given person cycles off the board or goes on to do something else. So who, what, and how? Who owns this process of onboarding? Who's going to perform it? Who's going to maintain it? You should probably know that. You should probably identify it. You should definitely document it within every single community board. And it may be different from one to the next. There is no automatic right answer to any of these things, but these are questions that you should have a clear, documented, repeatable answer to. What does a new member need to know? What are the processes, the expectations, the history of issues, the identified needs? What do they need to know as they come onto a community board? And not just globally about how community boards operate, but specifically to the one that you are on. What about that one and the community that you serve? What do you need to know? How are the processes of making decisions? How are the process of bringing things up at meetings? How do you communicate in between meetings? You name it. So you can identify each one of the processes that you actually have by looking around and seeing how you currently operate today and beginning to document them. The next part is the expectations. Know what the expectations are going in. If you're a new member of a community board, what's expected of you? How much time and effort do you think is required? What kind of work would you need to be doing in between meetings? How are you going to prepare for it? If you're serving on a committee, what are the expectations of the committee? Setting the expectations clearly and then meeting people where they are with the abilities that they have to, and the time and the effort that they have to give, is a critical function to keeping people engaged. And if you don't set the expectations when somebody is onboarded, it's going to make it really rough for them, and they're not going to know which end is up, and they're not going to be able to participate and contribute positively very quickly because they won't know what they're supposed to do. The institutional knowledge and history of issues is critical. These are the kinds of things where there may be issues that last a long period of time, and you're going to want to make sure that you document them. So you getting somebody up to speed when they're coming on is really important, so that they know how to assess where they could fit in. And then identified needs, knowing did you recruit somebody to your board, or do they have some sort of knowledge, skill, or ability that's going to be critical for an existing need or a need that could be coming up in some point in the near or distant future. The last part on this onboarding piece is the how. How are you going to do this? How are you going to operate onboarding? And how will it be a growing asset for future board members? In other words, offboarding should impact onboarding, right? There should be some way of revisiting it, revising it, and editing it, or adding to it, or subtracting to it along the way. And so you should look at each piece of this cycle as an ongoing concern collectively of the board. So there needs to be people, again, that own it, that revise it, document it, and then operate it. So all of those things become critical for onboarding. And anybody who here who has started a job and not had a great onboarding experience knows how confusing it can be when you start a new role and all of a sudden there's an expectation of you that you're not meeting because nobody told you how to do it, or there's a process that's in place that you're unaware of how to do it, and so you're not able to actually get something done that you need to get done. Those are grind points that actually cause trouble for organizations, and you can avoid many of them by doing really clear and effective onboarding for new members. So see this as not something that's just watch a video or read a document and then just show up to the meeting and everything will be okay. I know we have often the inclination to say that for people, but if good onboarding leads to good institutional knowledge and good effectiveness, because the better you're onboarded, quicker you get up to speed, the more you're able to contribute immediately. Okay, next slide. So this is part of a bigger piece. What are you going to do while you serve? While you're serving on a community board, think about the processes. Are the processes that you're engaged in clear? By clear meaning, are they written down? Does everybody have the same understanding of them and agree upon them? Because if you have a difference in understanding about what this process is intended to do, or the boundaries of it, you're going to end up having arguments over what we should or shouldn't be doing and how we're doing it. Nobody wants to begin to do something and have somebody go, "You're not doing this right," and then have it delayed for a month or two. That's unproductive. Not only is it unproductive, it actually demoralizes people because they may think they're doing it correctly, and then somebody comes in out of right field, cuts them off at the knees and says, "No, you're wrong. You did this all wrong. We need to redo it." That's a way to make things ineffective, and their whole goal is to be effective. So make sure that everything is very clear about what the processes are. Document them. This is one way to ensure that. Document them, stepwise tutorials, use Google Docs. That's the kind of thing where you can write them up. You can have other people give feedback on them. You can even have a process where once a year, once every 2 years, we look at them and make sure that we tweak them if we need to. But if you document them in a clear way, you have a chance of everybody being able to know what they are and being able to perform them. So make them clear, document them. In doing so, you can make it so that current board members and future board members are going to be able to operate and get things done. I know it sounds boring. I know it sounds high level, but it's really, really critical. The second part, expectations. We talked a little bit about this, but while you're serving, expectation management should be an ongoing concern. Does everybody know what's expected of them, where the boundaries are, like what you can and can't do, what you can and can't be involved in trying to solve, the limits of power of what you're involved with, and how do you be mindful of these things while doing work? If you know the boundaries and you know the expectations, you will have less frustration about, "Hey, we can't do this." Well, if it's outside the scope of what you're supposed to be doing and you know that, then it'll be a lot easier when somebody brings it up because they get excited to say, "I agree with you. I think that's a great idea. We don't have the power to do that. What we can do is XYZ instead, and that's within the scope of what we're supposed to do." That turns people's enthusiasm, instead of being told they're wrong or kind of othering them, it turns it into something positive and says, "Hey, you know what? I agree, but this is what we can do. So why don't we focus on that?" So expectation management is critical for groups, and it's critical for serving on any kind of volunteer activity. So make sure you have them, and you can write those down as well. Those are the kinds of things you can write down and communicate them clearly to people. And we remind each other of what's expected of us. We become responsive to one another, and we become responsible to one another for keeping the expectations level set. And so expectation management is really important for well-functioning volunteer organizations. History of issues. Issues are and decisions that should really be documented. And this is important because you don't want to lose that institutional knowledge. Having a really good history of issues with timing and documentation and anything that's a work product that people have gone through over time is going to be critical as you transition to having term limits. Why? Why is this so unbelievably critical? You won't lose anything. If you document all of it in the future, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, when somebody revisits an issue or something happens that's going to update an issue, you want the people serving at the time to go back and have the best thinking, all the documentation and all the decisions at the touch of a finger, so that they can go back and look at it and say, "Well, 15 years ago, we did it this way. This is what we thought about. This is what we did." So they can pick it back up and they don't have to redo all of that work. There's another reason why this is absolutely critical. There's a whole bunch of issues that you face as community boards that take a long time to resolve. And they may be protracted arguments with somebody or some organization or some institution about what the future should look like and why your perspective should be the right one to prevail, or why you have a differing perspective than another. And people will try to wear you down. They will also try to outlast you. And well-oiled organizational dynamics that have all of this stuff documented really well won't be beaten. So sometimes if someone's trying to wait you out, if the people from 15 years from now have exactly your thinking and have all the decision documents lined up, they're not going to lose that fight by attrition. So it's really critical that you have well-documented histories of issues, and that you keep them in such a manner that future people that didn't know about it can read up on it without having to come find you, and talk to you about it. So when you do that, you set people up in the future for success, and you also lay the groundwork for the important work that you did do not being in vain. The next part is identifying your needs. Needs assessments. Characterize the needs, prioritize things, and document them. This is so that nothing gets lost, so you know what's important and you can keep your eye on the top 3 issues within a given area. It's always good to have needs prioritization and to characterize what's involved with it. If you know it's a big, gnarly, complicated, thorny problem, map out what you think is going to be required to solve it. You don't have to solve everything at once, but if you map it out and you prioritize it, and you put a prioritized list together, we do this first, we do this second. These are the things we need to be worried about. These are the things we need to care about. In the future, when others pick it up, they'll be able to look at that and they'll be able to build upon it. They may reprioritize it. They may work on a piece of it. They may resolve part of it. But every time you touch it, you should do that kind of thing. That way, in the future, you're setting people up for success by identifying those needs, and then having it inform your decisions. So that's just something that every organization should always be doing while you're serving continuously. The last piece, which I keep saying over and over again, and maybe you think it might be important, documentation. It's its own issue. There should be people that are just concerned with this. Everything should be documented and maintained as you go in a manner that can survive the test of time. Use processes that work. Document them really well. Make it so that I call it the smart friend. It's the person doesn't have to be an expert in a given issue. They just need to be a smart person willing to learn and willing to help out, which all of you are, should be able to pick up any of these documents, understand what they are, and then use them in their service on the board. I think that's a critical way to think about how you draft them and how you maintain them. And someone should have their primary concern be this documentation, this knowledge base, this way of keeping things going so that future people can get the job done. So these are the areas that I think are important while you're serving. And you'll notice I'm not talking about any individual issue. You're the experts on that. You're the ones that bring that to bear on your community boards. And this is all about the organization of the board itself and how to keep it going and how to build capacity so that when that person who has served for a long time, who's just really good at that one thing, when they move on and are no longer on the board, you don't feel this immense loss because they're not there. What you do feel is the immense gain of knowledge that everybody around them had by their service. And that's one of the everlasting effects of having good organizations that document things really, really well. Okay, next slide. Great. Transition. Transition is one of those things that people often never think about. They just suffer the negative consequences of it because it's not thought through. Boy, this happens in the corporate world as well. And it is no different in a volunteer service organization or volunteer role. You have to think about transition. Now, volunteer boards are always in constant transition. And think about this as normal. Think about it as a cycle. There's always going to be someone or something that is in a transitional state. And it should not be anything to be feared or anything to have confusion around. It's something you plan for, just like everything else. For example, people join and leave continuously. There are times when for example, I have aging parents that I care for that live up in Riverdale. I love them to pieces. I'm more actively involved in their care over time. And so there may be times either during the year or when something's going on that I may be less or have reduced capacity and ability to participate in some volunteer type of work. That's normal. And then later on in that year or the following year, I may have a little bit more. So we have to think about how people have fluctuations in their ability to continuously serve. Sometimes people may take a break, they may reduce what they're doing, or they may leave entirely. And so we have to think about things in that context. So people join and they leave continuously. We have to expect that. We have to think that that's normal, and then we have to plan for it accordingly. Also, the context, nothing ever stays the same. Everything is in constant change. I know change is hard, change is scary, but we have to assume that change is continuous, and therefore we have to create durable systems that are not only capable of accepting change, but anticipate it and expect change to happen. So we have to constantly have a method for ingesting new information, making new decisions, and coming to a new understanding that propels us forward. And the final thing is, don't get caught unprepared. Planning for transition is how you don't get caught unprepared, how you don't get like sort of left out going, oh no, Joan just left the board. She was the real estate guru that we always loved and needed. And now we don't have her. What do? We didn't write any of it down. She had all of it in her head. And will somebody go run after her and ask her? We don't want that. We need to plan ahead of time and say, you know what? We know that she's going to eventually decide that she no longer can serve in this capacity because she's got other activities she needs to do and be involved in. So as we go, maybe every month we ask her to write a paragraph or we create an outline and we try to capture a lot of that knowledge as we go so that in the future, somebody else can see all the great things that she did and pick up where she left off. And that's what we need for our communities. And that's what we need you to do for our communities. Okay, what do you do? What do you gather when someone leaves? This is the thing about transition. This is in part offboarding. You want to capture the good, the bad, the otherwise, the accomplishments, the challenges, and you want to learn and grow the capacity of the board and the institutional knowledge based on that. And so this can be done in a very boring way as an exit interview. You should capture it. You should have a standard set of questions, maybe a survey, something you write up so that you can capture from that person what their experience was like and get some of their recommendations. Who better to give you some insight and reflect than somebody who is getting ready to roll off the board or to go on and do something else? And you should take a lot of that stuff pretty seriously because they've worked with the organization and they have the most recent perspective to share on it. Does that mean you redo everything because somebody was upset about one thing? No, of course not. You take this kind of in an even-handed manner, but it is an opportunity during transition to review processes, documents, and iterate on them. And so you should plan a process of doing that for every exit and transition that occurs with the board. Maybe you look at it and you go, you know, they gave us some really good feedback, and I think this should change how we do onboarding. We should include this additional piece of information. Or, hey, they identified that there was this one tweak to our process that might actually make it better. Or, oh boy, there's a whole bunch of things that we didn't yet document. Maybe we should document that before they leave. All of those things are good outputs that you could get from doing good transition planning and something as simple as an exit interview. So see it as an opportunity for reflection and to gain that 50,000 foot level perspective from somebody who's been in there in the trenches with you, working side by side with you. So that's where you get real benefit from transition planning. And so that's just another piece of this cycle that's really critical. Next slide. Okay, ultimately, this all comes back to leadership planning. So we've had a number of these pieces of the cycle. They all come back to leadership planning. What do I mean with this? Well, with term limits, planning and seeing your board as going through this cycle overall over and over and over again means that leadership planning is going to be an ongoing concern. And that's a good thing. And what does that mean? Everybody on the board should be thinking, do you know how you will identify any new potential members, right? Are you always on the lookout for somebody new? It's not just somebody else's role to try to recruit and bring them on. You serve on this board. You have a sense of what you need. You have a sense in your head of, I wish there was a person next to me that he had these kinds of knowledge or skills or ability or characteristics that would bring value right now. So if you have that, you might as well put that together, talk about it with one another, and have it a little bit as your wish list so that you can go out and find those people amongst your neighbors. Or you can ask for help from the borough president's office in trying to help identify because maybe they have some insights too. So use that as a way to say, okay, we need to always be thinking about our leadership and we need to know what kinds of roles we have, what kinds of needs we have, and who are the right kinds of people that and knowledge and skills and ability that will actually make things better for us and work well for what our needs are. So think of it as an ongoing thing. And by doing all of this, you're setting up those future members who will replace you or succeed you to carry forward that mission in a very positive manner. So you want to set them up for success. In addition, you could think about this in the specific. If you have an issue that you know is going to take 3, 5, 10 years, let's say some sort of a planning issue, right? Or zoning issue, those things always take forever. And there's often a variety of stakeholders with a tapestry of opinions and perspectives, whether it be partial agreement or disagreement and alignments in different ways. You know that that's coming and going to take up a lot of time. You may look in the coming years for people who can help with it. And you may have some insight into, well, we want to find a lawyer who has some good insights on this kind of work. We may want to find somebody in corporate real estate who has an understanding of what these needs are, or the perspective that could be different from ours, so we could try to get informed better by it. So as you think going forward about what the issues are that are not only currently going on, but the prioritized issues, as we talked about before, going forward, you can then try to identify what it is you're looking for and the capacity that you may need to build, and then be more purposeful about seeking it out. That's what leadership planning can really do for you. It can help you not only now, but it can help you in the future, because you're on top of things, you have them prioritized, and you understand what your needs are. That puts you in a better position to set people up for success in the future and to find the resources that you may need to succeed. What does this come back to? Comes back to really boring fundamentals, which are my favorite things on the planet. I love talking to students about them because it's all stuff you know how to do. None of this is hard. None of this requires being an expert. Yeah, I have a PhD. It doesn't require a PhD. It doesn't require a master's. It doesn't require a bachelor's. It doesn't even require a GED. It requires people who care, who are resourceful, who work together. That's it, right? These tools are easy to do, and assets can be created. Think about how you're going to create the assets that support each step of this cycle. Jointly own and manage these assets. Make them available to people. Don't hoard information, right? Use accessible formats. What does that mean? Things like Google Drive, right? Don't use a format that requires too many permissions or authorship levels. Don't invent barriers to being able to put this stuff together, add to it, edit it, and maintain it. Make it a community asset that you put together as a board, and you continue to add to it. Everything should be value add and additive over time. And then finally, avoid trying to control or hoard information. Be transparent as humanly possible. Characterize your issues, have everybody contribute. Everybody should be finding a way to actually add to this process. And nobody should feel like they need to control the process. They need to manage it in such a way that, you know, somebody's editing it, somebody's keeping it together, somebody's looking after it on a day-to-day basis, or keeping track of a list of needs and going and asking people to contribute. That kind of stuff is fine. That's proper management and stewardship. But nobody should feel like they own it and that nobody else should have access to it. It should be sort of like collectively raising a kid, right? It takes a lot of wonderful people around any child in order to raise a wonderful human being. A lot of love, a lot of investment. Think about this as in that sense. You should be loving it. You should be investing in it. Everybody should be contributing in a positive way, and nobody should feel like it is only theirs or is only the sort of the province of one or two people. It is collectively everybody's responsibility and everybody's capability to contribute to it. So that's how I think you should think about creating those assets. Finally, this is interesting because not a lot of people think about this. When you've already decided that you are leaving the board, or you have a term limit and you leave the board, you are an expert at that point. You've already served, you've already done a lot of work, you're really well prepared. What do you do now? You don't just disappear. I think boards can do a much better job of taking advantage of the leaders that they've created that are now still in their communities doing things. So I just have a few recommendations on this. Maybe create a listserv. I know it sounds boring, but do it. You can keep in touch with people. That way it's kind of like alumni of the community board. Obviously, everybody still cares. Just because you left the board doesn't mean you no longer care. So keep in touch with them. Find ways to engage them. Mentoring. I think that people near the end of their service on boards, or if they're one of the people that is very good or has a lot of knowledge in a given area, should be by process mentoring other members. Former board members can mentor current ones or people that are about to go on to a board. They can assist with onboarding in the final year. If you know you're about to be term limited out, you should be onboarding a new person and they should be kind of doing a ride along with you. You should be telling them how you did it, not because they need to do it the same way, but you pair up with people that are more experienced. Find ways to mentor one another so that you can do beyond just the documents. You can actually share a lot of that knowledge and teach and use a mentorship model. There's a reason that apprenticeship and mentorship models have worked for as long as humans have ever known how to do things. This is the primary way that human beings have transmitted knowledge since before we could write. So mentor people and create a mentoring process for yourselves. There is nothing that would keep you from having a former board member be a mentor for a current board member. There is no rule, there is no law, there is no regulation that says that's not permitted. You can put people in touch, they can talk to people, and the current board members can draw upon that experience and become supercharged in their ability to get things done. So I think it's something you could do formally that would work really well. Try to find additional ways to continue the participation of alumni. They can still contribute. They can still show up. They can still be a part of committees. And that's the last point. Create committees and put former board members on it. Find ways to keep people involved. And all of these things are things that you are fully allowed to do. And if you see that as part of your responsibility to do them, you can actually do a good job of not losing that capacity, particularly in the context of having term limits. So I think there's a huge role that is underserved for alumni of these boards. And I challenge you all to think about how each board can start to create that as an ongoing concern and take advantage of all the capacity that you built up in your communities and not just lose it when people stop their service. Okay. What does this put together? I know it's a repetition, but I really want to drive home the point that you should see this as a cycle. It is continuous. It's not linear. It's not a one-off. You don't just do this once. You go around and around and around, and each piece of it has some concerns with it. So when you go to onboard, you're really focused on learning, and you should be focused on getting mentored and being mentored by others. You should be investing in people when they're onboarding. This is the time to come around them, to surround them in a positive way, to bring them on board, to answer questions, to level set those expectations, to teach them all the processes and history and issues, and to provide them with all the support they need so they can get up and running and contribute. The sooner they know all that stuff and the sooner they feel comfortable with it, the better you are as an organization and the more value you get out of people while they serve. So onboarding becomes critical there. While you're in service, you should be operating, you should be achieving things, and you should be documenting what you're doing, right? Those are the big things you should be doing. During transition, you should be reflecting on what you've done. You should be mentoring and again, documenting, right? Because you don't want to lose it. So those are the two stages where documentation is a really big deal because that's while you're serving. And then when you're an alumni, you should be advocating, advising, recruiting people. Alumni are great for recruiting. They're out in your communities and they know what it's like and they've gone through the whole thing. And so they can be assisting in recruiting people and mentoring. So these are the kinds of activities based on each part of the cycle that people can expect and be involved in. Okay. That was the cycle. Think about your board service as a cycle. Think about the things you can do and all the pieces that you can create. We can talk in detail, especially in a Q&A and a back and forth. We're in a follow-up conversation if you want about specific tactics and assets that you could create. That's a lot of the what we call block and tackling. That's the doing. But I wanted you to get that big picture so you could see this as a cycle and see what areas you may want to focus on to begin that process now of trying to create these assets and to create this virtuous cycle for your community boards so that you're developing and passing on that institutional knowledge and not losing it. So this should all be in service of generating that knowledge and capturing it. Let's talk a little bit now as we change topics slightly to talk about both individual service and then group dynamics. So individual leadership, a lot has been written about this. I'm not going to go through the academic literature or point you to long-winded books. No, I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the things that we at the Mark School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch try to imbue in our students and our Bachelor's of Science and Public Affairs students and our Master of Public Policy and Public Administration students? What are we trying to get them to do? And how are we trying to get them to go about doing it? First, you're in a volunteer position, right? You're doing this because you care, because there's something you want to contribute, because you have that urge, and I love you for it. Find something you know you can do and do it. This is about focus. This is about an individual assessment. It's volunteer work. You only have so much to give. You have what you know. You don't know what you don't know. That's normal for everybody. Align your commitment with your ability to do something at the current moment. Give yourself permission not to try to boil the ocean or do absolutely everything. Focus on the thing that you really want to focus on and try not to get distracted or pulled in too many different directions. So find the thing you want to do and then try to do it. Keep in mind, you don't have to be an expert to be great at it. That's not, being an expert is not what volunteer work is about. It's about going in, having a passion, focusing on it, committing to it, aligning your commitment with your ability to invest and get something done and trying to do it. So I always tell people that you don't have to be the best and be amazing at everything. You just have to try to get something done. The second part at an individual level is think about your approach with your colleagues and the people you serve on. If you take the mentality of, I want to accomplish things with my colleagues, you will get more done. If you look at the person sitting next to you and you say, you know what, are you someone that I could get something accomplished with that I could work well with? And look around and think of everybody as, I have a room full of people that I need to find a few that I know I can work well with. And you know how to figure out if you work well with somebody. Some people need to be a little more friendly. Some people need a sort of a bantering, a sparring partner. Know how you work well and find the people on your board you work well with, and then focus on working with them. That doesn't mean that other people are good or bad. There's no judgment. We all have different working styles. Find the ones you work well with and work with them. In addition, the other side of that is avoid standing in the way of the people you don't work well with. If you know that for whatever reason, John rubs me the wrong way, I rub John the wrong way, we got off on the wrong foot, and both of us are good people, but we just, we're not there. We're not aligned. We're in that storming phase where we can't quite figure each other out and find a way to work really well together. Stay out of each other's way. Let them find the other people that they do work well with. If you identify someone that like, that person's not for me, fine, they're for somebody else. Let them go find that person. Those two people will work well together. They'll get something done. My job is to stay out of their way and support them getting their thing done, and they'll support me. So find the people you work well with, avoid the people you don't work well with, but never find yourself in a position of purposely standing in the way of things getting done. The last part, and this is just, I'm old enough to know that everything's a little bit more precious than we ever imagined. I think we also learned that lesson in spades during the pandemic, if anybody was negatively impacted by it. And look at everything as an opportunity to do something. Every meeting you have is precious. You could, if you know your term limits, you know when you're going to be done, you can calculate the number of meetings you have. And if you look at the number of meetings you have and you look at what you get done in each meeting, you will have an increased sense of urgency about getting things done, and that you have very few precious opportunities to absolutely get something accomplished. It is very easy in public service and very easy in volunteer work to stop progress, to stand in the way, to say no, to push things down, to criticize. Refuse to do it. Refuse to be the person that does that. It's easy to stop progress. It's amazing to get something accomplished. So if you look at one another and say, all right, we're all here to try to accomplish things. Our point is to self-organize into groups that can actually get things done and then allow other people to get things done. The entire board will be supercharged into being productive. And that's the end state that you want to be in. So that's my recommendation for you and a way to think about it in terms of your own individual leadership path. Everybody's got a lot of other flowery things to tell you about leadership, but that's my one specifically to serving on a volunteer board. Find the good people you work with, get things done, and refuse to stand in the way of anybody else getting things done. Because when everybody is accomplishing something, the whole group does better. Okay, that's the individual level. Here's a little bit about the group level. Groups need to focus. It's really hard with a lot of people who have different interests or are passionate, et cetera, to get everybody going in the same direction and to focus. This is why planning and having processes and documents matter. Focus, focus, focus. Plan things out, do them, document them, repeat. This is what your leadership should be doing for you. The leadership in your boards is not the person that you have to follow. They're not the expert on everything. Part of their goal is to help get the group on the same page and help with the prioritization process and help with delegating all the work in such a way that you can get something accomplished. And you pick people to do that. Some people are a little more naturally inclined to kind of, that sort of role. That doesn't mean they're the expert on everything. In fact, they shouldn't be the expert on everything, because if they are, then they would be standing in the way and they'd be pulled in too many different directions and nothing would ever get done. They should be very good at helping other people organize into groups and accomplishing things. That's their goal. And so focus, focus, focus. And for your leaders in group dynamics, help everybody focus, help everybody plan, and help people execute. A little bit about how you work together. If you work together, I was talking a bit about how the individual mentality that you bring to the table can lead to collective group achievement. This is how the groups can actually do that. How you work together collectively dramatically impacts what you can actually accomplish. Avoid criticism. I know this is like the simplest thing. It may sound like kindergarten or preschool or, Sunday school or religious school where we tell people they need to be nice to each other. All of that is true. But here, we're now living in a world where everybody criticizes one another. And if you're in a group where the whole goal is to get things done, you have to actually take a step, breathe, and say, I'm not going to participate in that. I'm not going to be critical of other people. You could be critical in the way of trying to be helpful, pointing out something that's missing, trying to contribute to it. That's different. But just being critical of other people, it demoralizes people, it brings group down, it ruins the enthusiasm, and it will stand in the way. So look around your group. You have a small group of people or subcommittee working on something, level set, acknowledge it, say, hey, look, we're not going to do that way. We're going to meet, we're going to try to get things done. If somebody's upset about something, we're going to hear them, their voice is heard. It's important for being able to express it. Emotions are good, express them, work through them. We're going to do it as a group, but we're not going to sit here and lob bombs at one another and tear each other down. Just decide every time you're not going to do that, and level set with one another and keep people honest about it. Keep each other accountable on it. Acknowledge it. Someone's having a bad day. Hey, I'm sorry you're having a bad day. That stinks. You want to talk about it? Let's take a couple minutes. Let's get it out. Let's talk through it. And then, okay, we've felt our feelings. They're important. Are we good? Are we able to now get our work done? Let's get the work done because we're all here to do it. We all have the same motivations and the same desire to serve. So try to remind yourself of that and get yourself into that headspace as a group to avoid criticism and focus on achievement. Set good boundaries. We have had a lot of terrible discourse. You all know this. We've watched for now decades our public discourse get worse and worse. And decide you're not going to do that. Set some ground rules for how you're going to engage with one another in both the easy and the tough conversations. Know when to let people speak and make sure that their voices are heard and show them that you care about their perspective and you're not going to ignore them, but also know when to take a pause, lower the temperature, or say, hey, we've reached the point in this conversation where we're not hearing one another, we're not getting something accomplished, and have a process where you can say, I'm throwing the red flag in right now. We're not going to get this resolved tonight. And all we're going to do is tear each other down if we keep going. I respect you too much to go there. We're not going to do that today. So set those processes for yourself. Set those boundaries. Those boundaries are important. I do it as an instructor in a college environment with my students because we talk about difficult things and we don't have the solutions. So when it gets to be too much, I say, hey, I hear you. This is a tough conversation. We can't solve it tonight. We can't resolve it. Can we agree that it's hard? And can we move on to something else? So set those boundaries for yourself as a group so that you don't get into a sort of an unproductive loop that just spirals downward. And you can set those kind of ground rules, and then everybody feels a lot more empowered to speak, but also empowered to stop the conversation in a positive way that actually is supportive of one another. So I encourage people to do that. And then the last part about these groups, and I talked a little bit about it before with the example of your leadership, roles based on knowledge, skills, and ability. When your roles are aligned with the people's knowledge, skill, and ability, Each person within their roles knows why they're there, how to contribute, and you wind up with the sum being greater than the parts. This is critical. If you know what you're bringing to the table on a given topic, you will feel empowered to speak to that point, and you'll know, do we have everything covered or not? So definitely try to identify that, especially, for example, you're talking about writing a new rule. Let's pretend that you're advising somebody on writing a new rule. You may want a lawyer present who's really good at drafting those sort of things. And they know that they may not be the topic expert on the topic, but they know how to craft it in such a way to convey the message you're trying to convey. I've worked with a lot of lawyers in my life. I love them. They help tremendously. I've also worked with a lot of accountants and architects and others. Everybody's got some skill that they bring to bear on a topic. You let the people with the subject matter expertise bring some of that to bear, and you let others support and help, and collectively you can identify who's doing what, and you can all put it together in a way that is greater than the sum of the parts. So in as much as you can, try to acknowledge and align people's abilities with the roles that they're in, and know that that's part of your group dynamic. Groups that do that really well achieve more, and your goal is to achieve the goals that you've set out for yourselves. And then lastly, this is a bit of a group mentality. If everybody in the community board and in your group has a mentality of how can I help, right? You're here to help, you're here to participate, you're here to contribute. Look at one another, look at people to approach you and say, how can I help? It's one of those things, I do it all the time. It always gets somebody to then tell you and unburden themselves. And when people unburden themselves with what's bothering them or what they think needs to be done, they feel heard. And when you do that, you also set yourself up for success, because now you know what the real issue is, and you can focus on the actual issue instead of anything other than the issue. So it's a question that can help focus you and orient you. So always ask each other, how can I help? How can I be of service to you? And then the last part on this is, what can we do within our power to make things better? And I always say within our power, because you exist within a context, you only have a certain scope. What can we do within our power to make things better? And when someone says something and they have a long bit of feedback and some of it seems like we can't do that, we're not supposed to do that, you have all these thoughts sometimes when somebody's expressing themselves. Instead of saying, we can't do that, you shouldn't do that, that's wrong, that's out of scope, instead of reverting to the criticism, put it back to them. Put it back to them. Ask them the question. Say, what can we do that's within our power to make this better? Ask them to express within that context what they think should be done, because then you actually have a proposal on the table from them with a recommendation, and that's a good starting point. You might say, I agree with most of that, I agree with part of that, I agree with none of that, but I hear you, whatever it may be, but you're actually reorienting the conversation as a group towards what you can do. And that is going to serve you well in terms of planning and executing. So these are just kind of quick sort of interventions that I encourage people to try out, see if they work for you, because they can help you focus, and they can get you on a path that gets you working together really well as a group, so that you become one of these super high achieving boards, here in Manhattan or in another borough. Okay, that's it. I get on a roll, I kind of go through it. I would love to hear what your questions are. I don't have all the answers, but I would love to have a dialogue with all of you about it. By the way, this is one of those things, contact me at your own risk. You're welcome to invite me to one of your meetings. You're welcome to come out for a cup of coffee with me. I live in Gramercy in the East 20s. I'm happy to meet with anybody and talk to them about it, and be your, community board therapist. But happy to talk with people about it. Feel free to send me an email. Look at the random pictures of street art and beautiful New York architecture I put online on Instagram. I'm happy to be of service to you. Again, thank you for having the opportunity to speak with you. I think it's wonderful that you all spend the time and effort and energy to make our city better. It's something that other cities don't have this. And we're both lucky and special in that we do, and that we have such committed people that do such great work on them. New York is really special that way. And what you're doing is a very special type of service. So, the rest of us are in debt to all of you for doing it. And let's, talk about it a little bit.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you so much for the presentation. I found it incredibly insightful, and I can see based on the messages that we're getting in the Q&A that other folks feel the same way. Um, I can address a couple of these real quick. So I think a couple of folks have asked about getting the slide deck, which you mentioned at the beginning that you're happy to share out. So if
Yep.
you get it to me, we're happy to disseminate it to all of the boards. We will get it to your chairs and district managers to share out, okay? Um, there was also a couple of questions that came in that were more for the MBPO office than for you, so I'm happy to address those. So I know that you had mentioned how board members actively kind of recruit other members, right? If you're meeting other people that might be a benefit to the board to, try to bring them into the fold. I know you mentioned chairs when you talked about that as well as other members. So I think some folks were questioning about whether board chairs are part of the selection of board members. They're not, but I think the message there was how we all in our different capacities, whether it's through your congregation or it's through other programs that you work with, nonprofits, other places that you serve, when you come across folks that would be a benefit to the board, we would always encourage you to encourage them to apply to the board.
Absolutely. Identifying leaders in your community is an ongoing activity. We all know we've met someone that we think is special. And we think they're special for some reason. We think that they get along really well with one others. We think that they're really giving. We think they're really smart. I mean, I can think of 20 people like this that live within 2 blocks of me. And what I was referring to there is along what Eric was saying, identify those people, um, uh, usher them in the right direction, encourage them, be the person that sits down with them over a cup of coffee and talks to them about it. That's how people get involved. And anybody who serves on a community board, I don't care what role you're in, you can do that. And you should feel empowered to do that because that's how we draw people in. And that's how we identify the people that are going to do the stuff that's next. There's process and there's steps and all that. And Manhattan Borough President's Office organizes all that. And our staff here, they're the experts in that. But you're going to be the ones that are going to find that purple squirrel, that unicorn, that special person that's going to make things better for all of you.
Yeah, and I would even add to that, we have had record years where we've had over 1,000 applicants, and I am more than happy to receive another 100 applicants if there are folks in your communities that you come across that would be great members of the board. So please do share that information with anybody who wants to apply. There was one other question I want to address from OC about the role of the district manager to keep tight records. So it is the one of the responsibilities of a district manager. I think what we're really highlighting is just how important that role is. And this is kind of a segue to a session that we're hoping to do sometime in the near future. It's about how we store that information, how we disseminate that information, how we share that. And I will say that just earlier in the summer, we had a presentation. Our office, the Borough President's Office, held a presentation, thankfully, with the support of the district manager and community board 6 for all of the chairs and district managers about how they have been archiving records using Airtable. I know that other boards are working on different ways of digitizing paper archives, etc. We're hoping to at some point soon have a session. We're looking for something that makes the most sense for all boards about how we actually do record collection and organize and kind of database all that information in a way that makes the most sense so that we can have that institutional knowledge passed on, just as we've been discussing. I think with that, I will pass it. I will actually go through some of the questions that we're receiving in the Q&A, if that's okay with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, that would be great. If you ask them and I'll try to answer them. And if there's follow-ups, we can. And I'll comment a little bit on what you just said. That may be in supplement to the purposes of your managers. There is nothing that would prevent a community board from having its own Google Drive with its own documents that the people that serve on it develop themselves and share with one another going forward. That stuff can always be shared with the Borough President's Office and captured as needed, as necessary, as you see fit. But there's nothing that would stop you from writing your own little own little piece on something and sharing it with one another. There's no rule against that. So and I'll give you an example from my own service. I serve on a cooperative board, which everybody has opinions on, right? Co-op boards. And on my co-op board, I use Google Docs a lot. Sure, the of record for the corporation is the management company, and they maintain documents, et cetera. But as I'm working with other board members or getting some input from a shareholder in the building, I will use Google Docs extensively and share things with people and collect information and assets, and then share it with others. When I eventually decide I've had enough and I move on from it, I'll share all of that with the next person, and manage the ownership of those documents so that they have it. And there's nothing to stop you from doing that. Absolutely nothing. And that's a way that you shouldn't feel encumbered by what's existing now or coming on board to start now. You can always start now, and you can always figure out how to migrate documents or hand them over to somebody who can then capture them and use them. But you don't have to wait for them to start doing the work.
Thanks for that. And I will piggyback one last time off of that and remind folks, when we do um, have any of these records or shared, I would always encourage folks, if you have an email address that you create specifically for the board, just because all of these are public documents, you are part of a city agency and those are foilable. So please remember that. To one of the questions that came in, what are your views regarding mentorship for new members? Should the board assign mentors to assist new members navigate their tenure on the board?
Great question. You can. And some people are naturally more interested in mentoring than others. I often recommend asking around who wants to raise their hand to do it. But then there are people who have a lot of knowledge who may think, I'm not that good as a mentor. I believe that's wrong. I believe everybody can and everybody's able to do it. So yeah, you can assign it. You can ask people to raise your hands. I would say that that's up to each individual board to figure out how to do it and how to match people up. But everybody should be involved in it. Mentorship should be considered part of what you do, and part of engaging other people constructively and positively. And so we should all be participating in it. If you only have, I don't know how many new board members you get each year, and how many total on each board. I always forget the exact numbers. But if you had 3 coming on and 12 existing, you got a lot of options of people who have been there a while who can mentor, and it's okay to have more than one. The more we work as a group and support one another, the better it's going to be. So yeah, I would say start out doing one-to-one, and experiment with it. Start adding more, and ask everybody what they would like to do, and then just start. That's the best way to figure out how to do it. Start now, and do it for a year. Revise it next year based on what you learned.
Great, thank you. Another question was, who is responsible for documenting the cycle of service items?
I think you guys decide that. That's the fun part. So let's say I'm just making up an example. Zoning, like you got some zoning thing that you really care about, and there's somebody who's always been really meticulous about zoning. Maybe they write up the process that you internally have had for how to have those conversations and what to do. And they're, for now or for a year, they're the person that's supposed to start documenting that, and everybody tries to help them. So you assign it to different people. But everybody can contribute to it, because a lot of people might have, I might have only 2 paragraphs to contribute on one part of an issue, but on a different issue, I might have 5 pages. And so, have that owner start to document things. Don't expect perfection, just expect that it gets started and it iterates. Nothing has to be perfect. Nothing has to be even 80% of the way there. It just has to start, because if it starts and you have the cycle view of it over time, it's just going to keep growing and growing. So you have an owner, and then other people are contributors, and you take the stance as a group that when the owner of something comes to you and asks for your contribution, you're supposed to take the time to contribute in some way, shape, or form, at their request. Whether it be 20 minutes of reviewing a document or writing a paragraph for them, doesn't matter. But everybody should feel that it's their job to contribute when someone requests, and every owner should feel empowered to go and request other people to contribute. And if you set that as a process, then people can begin to start building the capacity.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We actually had a few different questions that came in, but I think this might also be something that I'm happy to address. But if you have anything, I would love to hear too. It was just about folks were asking almost each other about best practices when it comes to public members, if they should be on certain committees, about planning committees. Um, I just wanted to make a note on this, which is um, this is something that is constantly being discussed when we hold our borough board meetings. As many of you know, borough board is a public meeting that we host with all of the chairs and the council members as well each month. And there is always a conversation about what one board may be doing differently than another, suggestions, best practices. Some boards have found ways to streamline voting so that it reduces meeting time by up to 30 minutes. Some boards have a particular way in which they have chairs and co-chairs in order to bring in some newer members with some more veteran members. So these are things that are constantly being discussed. I would urge you, I know some boards have like inter-board meetings if there's something that's happening across in a neighboring community that you are in contact with other boards. I would tell you to contact them and ask them, get a cup of coffee and talk about how they do things, and also share it with your chairs. If there's something that you'd really like to be elevated to a borough board conversation, we're happy to have that discussion there too.
I think that's great. If you have a sort of a board of boards, which is what that sounds like, where some of the leaders come together, you can set an agenda item if you want, where they talk about the things that they've been creating capacity around, and they can share some of the documents or processes that they're proud of that they think work really well. Because you should be talking to other community boards in some sort of semi-structured way. And I would actually say that the borough president's office could be a really good sort of intermediary on that part of it, which is if they're hearing from Community Board 11, they got a great voting process that makes things run smoothly in meetings and it's documented really well. That doesn't mean that every other community board has to adopt it as is, but if they're able to share that with the other ones, and the other ones look at their own process and say, oh, I like this piece and I like that piece and we can update ours, that's how you share. There is a community that I'm a part of, a professional society that has a very strong history of this. And that's why I sort of presented things the way that I did. It's a regulatory function and an ethics board kind of function. And they're notorious across the United States for sharing their template documents with one another that they develop. I developed this thing, it took me 9 months to develop it, and then I gave it away for free to all of my colleagues across the country. And they're known for it. And someone's like, well, I know how I can find that process. I didn't create it myself. I'm at a smaller institution. I don't have the money to create it. So I'm going to go to that big rich institution and ask them, and they're going to email it to me in 5 minutes because we have a community that shares with one another. So if you see it that way, you can actually start to really take advantage of this capacity building by cross-sharing at the leadership level. And the borough president's office could become a very useful broker for that information and sort of a center of excellence around how to operate. And so you can use that to very good effect.
Great. Thank you so much. We have one final question, more comment, and I think it's an excellent way to wrap. One of our board members just wanted to thank you for a truly useful presentation. They mentioned that their board has undergone disputes and transition to new leadership in the last couple of years. So the suggestion of just taking other board members out for a cup of coffee is a very good one. When we get to know each other at a personal level, we recognize we're all trying to help the community from whatever perspective we come from. Also appreciated your comment that the board can be greater than the sum of its parts. We can work with it and respect one another. So looks like
Agreed.
message was received.
Agreed. And let me know. These slides should be made available to you. Happy to take an email from somebody or meet anybody for a cup of coffee and talk about it. As a public affairs professor, I care about this deeply. And I'm proud of all of you for doing it. And you know, this is why New York is the greatest city on earth. Because New Yorkers do this kind of thing for one another.
Again, we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate this presentation. For folks in attendance, I would let you know whether there's something that you want to watch again, or if you have a colleague who wasn't able to make it and you feel like this would be really helpful for them, which I feel is all of our board members would really appreciate this. Please let them know. This will be on the Manhattan Borough President's website and on our YouTube page, probably within a week or so. I think with that, we will say good night. Thank you so much again, Dr. Block. We really appreciate your time and for making yourself available to all of us here. Just thanks again to the Borough President and Keisha Sutton James, our Deputy Borough President, for allowing us to continue the leadership training series. We hope that this has been useful to everyone, and we want to say good night.